Okay, now that you have all gone and examined what Bible translations that you're using, let's talk about chapter 6. I want to start off with a quote, or with the beginning of a section in chapter 6. And this is on page 165, and it's the section called Sanctifying the Cult of Domesticity. And in many ways, this is the heart of this chapter. And what I argue in chapter 6 is that this is really where we begin to see biblical womanhood as we know it today begin the journey to be written into the heart of the gospel itself for evangelical Christians. So this is what I write, page 165. By the early 19th century, the separation of work from home, scientific claims about female distinctiveness and weakness, and Christian teachings emphasizing the role of wife and the natural piety of women melded together. The cult of domesticity was born. It's hard to pin down its exact birth date, but it had definitely emerged by the early 19th century. The four main components of the cult of domesticity were first articulated by historian Barbara Welter, and I summarize them here. 1, piety. Women are naturally more religious than men and more attuned to spiritual matters. This means that they are better equipped than men to guide the spiritual education of children. It also means that women's education should focus on cultivating this trait. 2, purity. Women are not naturally sexual creatures. Their minds and hearts are purer than men's. And sexuality is important only because it allows women to be mothers. I actually have a hard time not laughing during that. Women have to be covered and protected from the danger of sexual predators. 3, submission. Women are not designed to lead. They do not have the mental capacity or the emotional temperament to lead in the political or economic realms. They yearn to follow the lead of strong men. When I'm teaching in the classroom, I have an image that I put up that is a sort of a cartoon drawing of a 19th century woman's brain. And it is full of babies and cats and clothing, showing that women have no room in their heads for things like politics and business. So piety, purity, submission. And finally, domesticity. Do you remember when we read both the Baptist Faith and Message as well as the Danvers Statement? Did you hear in both of those the idea that women's focus, their God-given responsibilities on the home, that was being lost? Domesticity. Women are not designed to work outside the home. The Industrial Revolution moved work for pay outside the domestic space. Women were to stay home and manage the household while men went outside the home and earned the daily bread. This also means that women's education should focus on improving domestic skills, which is the origin of home economics courses. Y'all, the argument that I make in The Making of Biblical Womanhood is that biblical womanhood isn't biblical. It is constructed in culture. The cult of domesticity shows clearly how much we have taken cultural values and applied them to women in the church. And these four characteristics that I just read, even though in the 19th and even the 20th century, in fact, so much, if you think about focus on the family, you think about the Council for Biblical Manhood and Womanhood, if you read very many Desiring God articles, one of the things that you will see are these characteristics still emphasized for women. In fact, I just read a Desiring God article not too long ago that talked about the leadership of if women should emulate the leadership of biblical women like Jael, who of course drove a tent spike through a man's head. I bet you can guess the answer. No, modern women shouldn't do things like that. And in fact, the article even questioned if women should be portrayed in movies as superheroes, because that is fantasy, not what women should really be doing. The cult of domesticity still thrives in modern evangelicalism, and it has nothing to do with women, with the calling of women by God. So what I want to do is I want to tell you a story that really shows that when we move outside our comfort zone of the modern world, of the modern U.S. world, of perhaps even the Southern conservative evangelical world, what we find is that biblical womanhood looks really, really different. So the woman that I want to talk about is actually a 17th century woman. But before I do that, I want to tell a little preview story about a woman named St. Paula, who I talk about in The Making of Biblical Womanhood. And this is actually one of the most shocking criticisms that I received. It's one that actually makes me laugh quite a bit. But when I wrote about Paula in The Making of Biblical Womanhood, I wrote how she was called by God to go with Jerome to go help him translate the Bible into English, which became the Latin Vulgate, which was the most popular translation of the Bible for 1,000 years and brought the Bible to all sorts of people throughout Europe. Significant calling of Paula. However, in order to go with Jerome, Paula left all but one of her children, Eustochium, who went with her. After The Making of Biblical Womanhood came out, I was criticized by some folk for championing women abandoning their children because I put out the story of St. Paula. Well, this, as I said, was really funny to me because I remember thinking at the time, I was like, y'all, what if I had included the story of Wlada Petros, which I did not include in The Making of Biblical Womanhood, because Wlada Petros completely destroys, shatters the idea that the cult of domesticity is a biblical calling, because Wlada Petros was a Christian leader in Ethiopia, and she doesn't look anything like the cult of domesticity. Let's talk about Wlada Petros. She was an Ethiopian noblewoman who lived from 1592 to 1642. She was a wife, a mother, and a nun. She fought heroically to preserve the Ethiopian church against the onslaught of Roman Catholicism. She was a radical itinerant preacher, and she performed miracles, even raising folk from the dead. She faced wild animals, calmed the sea, produced flour to make bread, and won a public showdown against the Ethiopian king. Her book is the oldest and longest biography written by Africans about an African woman. And she is heralded as one of the most important saints, either male or female, in Ethiopia. At the end of her life, Jesus came to her and blessed her, saying, quote, "He who has endured hardship in this world will be refreshed and live forever." Then Jesus conferred upon her the rank of archdeaconess. In other words, he authorized Wlada Petros as not only a woman in ministry, but an ordained woman in ministry with authority over men. Wlada Petros, as historian Wendy Belker describes her, was an exemplary Christian woman in 17th century Ethiopia. Yet, Wlada Petros wouldn't have struck us as modern American Christians, especially modern evangelical Christians, especially now that I've seen their resistance to the story of St. Paula. She would not strike us as an exemplary Christian woman. She was aggressive, brutally violent, hitting her servants, and even calling on God to kill some of her followers. God usually acquiesced and killed the people she requested. But at least once she took matters into her own hands and committed murder. She disobeyed authority figures, she lied, she yelled at her followers when they showed signs of weakness, sadness, or fear, including forbidding a mother to grieve her dead son. Belker writes that Wlada, quote, became a tough woman who led a tough life and was tough on her followers. She was not, as Belker continues, nice. I imagine, however, that for some modern Christians, the biggest problem with Wlada Petros may not be her violent temperament, The biggest problem with her may lie in Wlada's refusal to act like a biblical woman, if I can use that phrase. She refuses to submit to male authority, and she rejects the role of wife and mother. Wlada certainly did not graciously submit to her husband, as Southern Baptists claimed Christian women should do. Wlada refused to convert to Roman Catholicism like her husband did. And then she abandoned him twice to become a nun. She also did not submit to male ecclesiastical authority. Twice in her biography, men invoke the Pauline prescriptions against her, trying to demote her. Wlada Petros also does not act like a good wife nor a good mother. After she returned to her husband the first time, she regretted her choice. She refused the marriage bed and worked hard to make herself as physically repulsive as possible to her husband. Certainly a very different approach than we would find preached at marriage conferences today or even written into marriage books. She exhibited very little maternal affection. Wlada gave birth to 3 children before she abandoned her husband the first time, all of which died in infancy. We never see her mourn her children. In fact, she prayed during each pregnancy that if they weren't going to please God with their lives, would God just kill them as babies? When they all died, Wlada assumed this was for the best. As the text reads, quote, all of them died by the will of God, end quote. Wlada Petros does not fit modern evangelical notions of Christian womanhood. She doesn't even fit early modern ones. Indeed, the Christian culture that I grew up in small town Southern Baptist Texas focused on marriage, motherhood, and submission for women. Wlada Petros does not shine in any of these categories. What she did do well, however, was preaching, teaching, and exercising ecclesiastical authority over both men and women in the church. Biblical womanhood is in the eye of the beholder. It fits, it changes as culture changes. And what we see as Christian virtues in one area may not be seen as Christian virtues in another. And y'all, this shouldn't surprise us, because did you know that women in the Bible are not cookie cutter either? Women kill, women preach, women teach, women disobey, women cheat on their husbands or anyone. Women are also faithful. And in the New Testament, did you know that while the male disciples are told over and over again by Jesus that they have little faith, women are consistently told by Jesus that great is their faith. Biblical womanhood is more than we have imagined it to be. It is certainly much bigger than the ideals of piety, purity, submission, and domesticity.